Hello, and welcome to the Morgan Latif Spotlight Sessions. This week, my guest is Charl Bassil. Charl is a candid, disruptive, and seasoned executive who's held CMO positions in some of the most reputable organizations in the world. He's currently the Chief Brand Officer for the BBC. And in this conversation, we go through his fascinating journey and how his cultural and his background context really shaped his leadership style. It was a really interesting conversation to understand some of the lessons that he's taken over the years and how he's transferred them into each position he's held. I took a huge amount of value with it, and I'm pretty sure you will as well. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation. Charl, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Sam, thanks for inviting me. Nice to see you again.
Likewise. And so look, Charl, with our Leadership in Action podcast, I always like to start at the beginning. So you already have a pretty extensive leadership track record in the marketing in the beverage field. But can you take us first through who were your initial leadership influences?
Yeah, I mean, so it actually goes back to my childhood, really. I'm the son of immigrant parents from Lebanon, and what happens with immigrant communities generally, I guess, is they coalesce around a common focal point. Whether it be the church, the synagogue, the mosque, whatever it might be, but it's also around somebody's home in the community, and it happened to be our home, and it happened to be my dad, who was the unofficial mayor of that community. So I think. And that may be a bit cliched, but I guess my dad was my first role model when it came to leadership. And what I saw in him was somebody who was not only gregarious for the sake of being friendly and open, but he genuinely cared about people and genuinely took an interest in, their lives and what was happening in their lives. And so people came to him for advice, came to him for help. And I observed in him somebody who led through genuine care for others. So I would say that was the starting point, and it sort of inspired me to want to take on leadership roles. First at school, in South Africa, we have sort of this prefect and head boy, head girl thing going. So, I was head boy of my school and then junior mayor of the town. I was the first English-speaking Catholic, non-Afrikaans mayor of a little town in South Africa. And then at university, immediately got involved in, student representative work, as class rep, then as the Students Engineers Council, then the Student Leadership Council. And so, it was very much in my veins, I think, from the very beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? That natural inclination, and I think, as you said, probably stemming from the home a little bit, and a little bit about how he influenced you. But as you then progressed in your career, right? Was there also any professional role models that you also looked to? Because I think I agree. I mean, certainly family plays especially if you come from cultures that are very family centric, where the father or the mother figure plays a huge influence on not just your personality, but essentially also how you treat others. But when you started going into the working world, were there also other role models that you looked to sort of influence your style?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I was fortunate. My very first corporate job was with Procter & Gamble. So straight out of university, and I was a production line manager in my first job with Oil of Olay and Clearasil. And it's interesting, I was influenced very strongly actually by the P&G way of leadership, the process-led approach, the discipline of management that sort of shaped, I think, not just this idea of leadership, but actually gave it some structure and some cadence. And then this was also a time of transition in South Africa. So we were moving out of the era of apartheid, post-sanction era. And was this kid basically from university on a production line with guys who had been in the business for years, most of them over 50, all blue collar workers. And I have to say there was something really beautiful about the way that they helped me to learn how to best manage and lead them. So they almost took me under the wing and sort of taught me what leadership really means for the people that are working on the line. And I mean, we achieved some amazing things as a result. We had one of the things they measure in the production world is line efficiency. And the factory that was bought by P&G was a legacy business, and the efficiencies were very low, and things were not looking that good when I took over the lines. But we had a plan to become benchmark, and so the idea of creating a vision was one of the things I learned also at P&G. The plant manager at the time happened to be this amazing guy, Ferris, from the US, and he actually, he was Lebanese American, actually, funny enough. So there was this, connection. He was a great role model in kind of creating a vision, creating a future that was different to the present. And so that combination of, a plant manager who was, very visionary, and a team of people who were very kind to me, I have to say. It was my first leadership role. I think really, really influenced my style and the way that I started seeing leadership, and I became much more interested not only in the feeling and the desire, but also in the science and the rhythm and the process. I would say was my very first starting point. And then, honestly, if I call out the people along my career, there's probably 2 or 3 that stand out for me. And one of them being Norman Adamy at SAB Miller. I was his executive assistant. So it was my first role after Bain. And I sort of learned what I'd call kind of the working MBA at Bain, learned the strategy, learned all the technical stuff. And I had this opportunity to work at the foot of the chairman of the company. And watching him in style, this ability to navigate both very high-level strategy, have the long-term vision, and then translate it back into very short-term operational detail. That's an incredible capability of kind of looking to the future, and then coming back to the present and really focusing on, getting everything right so that the future looks good. So from him, I really learned that duality of long-term thinking, creating a vision, but then actually working out with the organization how to get there and focusing on day-to-day discipline in order to get there. So Norman really stands out for me as an exceptional role model. And then sort of fast forward, a couple of years to Conor McQuaid, who was the guy who hired me into Pernod Ricard. And yeah, was an Irishman coming to South Africa to set up a business across Africa. And I think what I learned from Conor was that, again, this idea of having long-term vision and strategy, but translated into the operations. But what he really showed me as well is like having a soft touch with people, not only in the boardroom, but actually, he was a smoker, I'm not, but, having a cigarette on the balcony, or, in our case, having a drink at the bar after work, and really hearing people at, when they could be most honest and most transparent and understand what's working and what's not working in the business. And so spending time with him and learning that approach to leadership, which is not just, running the business and kind of steering the ship, but genuinely listening to the organization. And I think that translated also to customers, to agencies, like really, really listening. So a great skill in leadership there. And then more recently, Anna Malmacher was the CEO who hired me to the Absolute company. And Yao was somebody whose leadership style stood out for me for a number of reasons, actually. She is an exceptional visionary, again, in terms of where she wants to take the business. But I think maybe the one thing that really stood out for me was her ability to let people, to create a very clear true north, to create a very clear vision of what she wanted, and then let people get on with it. So really liberating the organization to move forward at pace and to progress without too many obstacles. I think sometimes as leaders, you can create obstacles unknowingly. And she really kind of wanted to unleash and liberate an organization to create confidence and to create, momentum and to create belief. And I think that was exceptional, actually. And the other thing that she did really well was she could identify really top talent. But I think that's true for her and the other role models in my life, just identifying really top talented people and bringing them into the organization by giving them a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, a sense of belonging, and then unleashing them,
Yeah.
So those are just some of the, and there's many, there's many people I could refer to. Yeah. Very fortunate in that regard.
Well, there's a few things to unpack there. And one of the first things, you noted that when you started your career, you were in operations and production. And then interestingly, you made it all the way to chief marketing officer, which are, in a lot of people's view, or for most people, it's sort of almost the diametrically opposed functions, right, in terms of how they see things. So I was curious to see how that initial experience in leadership and operations shaped you being a marketing leader.
I think every building block shapes a person. So, I don't think there's anything that goes to waste ultimately. But what I would say is there's probably a number of elements that the operational or engineering or production side of the business really helps in marketing. So I would start with, to truly understand a brand, you also have to understand the product. You need to understand that this is what you're selling is a solution to a consumer's problem. I'm thirsty, I need refreshment. I need to cook on the stove, I need a pan. Whatever it is that you're providing consumers actually is a product, but then ultimately, when you're really good at it, and the people before me that built these brands, really good at building a brand, the brand is really what makes the product, distinct, meaningful, recognizable. People trust it. But there's still a link between the product and the brand. They're not distinguishable. They're not separate. So when you intrinsically involved in developing a product, both at an innovation level, at an R&D level, then at a production level, you understand what goes into making the product. It helps you when you get to selling the brand on multiple levels. One, good understanding of what goes into it. Two, an appreciation for your partners in supply chain and in production and in logistics. And when they're appreciated, they bend over backwards to deliver on time, in full, even when there's a crisis. But even more deeply, when you have a meaningful relationship with your production team, and they know that you come from that world, there's an immediate kind of like the walls drop. It's not some marketer, creating fluff. There's actually somebody who really understands what we do. He's been there, and there's an openness and a transparency to actually having a conversation around what's in the product and how they want the product to be perceived in the world, and how much effort goes into the quality and the reliability and the repetition around delivering that product and the efficiencies that are required. So that's really important. And then finally, especially when it comes to growing a portfolio, I think innovation is such an important part of growth these days. But innovation doesn't just come from understanding the consumer. It's important. I mean, that's the starting point. What does the consumer need? What are the white spaces? Where is our brand's right to win? This is clearly the framework that you're following. But then you're going to need to develop products that deliver against those needs. When you understand production, when you understand the production process, that conversation becomes that much more deep and that much more meaningful. So, honestly, I see it as a fantastic building block in developing not only leadership, but really kind of connecting the dots ultimately.
Yeah, and I think you certainly strike me as somebody that is not afraid to also jump into these new functions and take on these new challenges where, and I think that's becoming I'd like to think a little bit more commonplace in terms of people having a bit more of a holistic view of what a company is and wanting to change from different functions. I don't think organizations are as rigid anymore and just pushing you down a specific path, particularly in like the big companies and best in class companies like P&G. But I also wanted to understand your difference in also leading operations and again, the more creative types, should we say, in the marketing. Like, did you, again, from all that experience and even from the strategy experience at Bain, just understanding different personalities, how different people think, how they solve problems, did you find there were certain common threads in terms of leading people, or did you really have to adjust your style depending on the individual or the functions? Like, what were the learnings you took from that?
No, I would say there is definitely a common thread, and then there's the situational leadership component. So the common thread is, people are people. Human beings want to do the right thing. Human beings typically want to do the best for themselves, for their community, for their organization, for their family. I have a fundamental optimistic view of humanity. Like, we're really trying our best. And that's true for the engineer in the plant as for the sort of creative person at the agency. The technical skills and maybe the approach are quite different. I mean, they're fundamentally different. The one is, much more structured around using science as a driver to develop a solution in order to be more efficient, to be more effective. The other is using, creative processes, using creativity to solve for an emotional connection with the consumer. But ultimately, the people behind that thinking, the people that are housing those brains, have the same kind of experience of life. Whether it's a family or no family, whether it's just kind of trying to get through the day, whether it's the experiences of grief and the celebration of good moments. When you truly are in love with human beings, and when you really want the best for the people that you work for, I mean, genuinely, then, you know, leadership has a common thread. And of course, the difference is in kind of the processes that you apply and the conversations that you have. And I think, you know, when you have, you know, clarity of vision, when you have clarity of strategy, that's true for both an operations environment as it is for a strategy environment, as it is for a creative environment. That clarity is super important. Also, you know, having a plan to get to the vision is super important. Caring for and coalescing a team, a multifunctional or diverse group of people, diverse group of thinkers is common as well. The processes to get there, as I said, might be a bit different. You know, the workshop, the creative workshop, the brainstorming might be a bit different to the diagnostic approach to, you know, solving a problem on the line. But ultimately, you're looking for a solution to a problem, and you're doing that by using diverse thinkers who have access to technical skills and bringing them together to really kind of, you know, unleash the power of a diverse group of people, diverse group of thinkers. Yeah. So I'd say leadership, for me at least, you know, leadership is a privilege, and it's a gift that's given to you, and one that you can apply anywhere. You know, I spoke about building community. It's not dissimilar. I think as a leader, you have to give space to the people that you're working with, whether it's the community or your organization, in order for them to really shine. And if you do that, then great things can happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how you say community a lot, and I imagine, again, that also stems from the influence of your father and those kind of early examples. But that community, in particular, again, in organizations nowadays, you're dealing with a community of different nationalities, different backgrounds, different religions, different values. And again, interestingly, you have a very diverse background. You know, we talked about it a little bit in that, you know, grew up in South Africa, Lebanese roots, you live in Europe, you lived all over the world, you traveled all over the world, and you've also managed global teams. So when building this community that is now geared towards achieving a goal in an organization, what are the key lessons you've taken from that, specifically when it comes to managing those international teams and getting them all focused on the same goal?
Look, I mean, I think you know, you rightly said my background, you know, at the time felt like a really difficult thing. You know, growing up in a small town as a Lebanese kid, as the foreigner, you know, felt difficult. Actually, I was a bit confused by my own identity, like where did I belong and who am I? But I think once you resolve those identity questions, you know, so actually I give credit to a Greek friend of ours in South Africa who, you know, penned a musical, and he wrote something in a program, and I've actually, you know, borrowed what he wrote, and I paraphrased it for myself, which is, in my head, I'm Western. I've studied, you know, pretty much British education system, and in my heart, I'm Lebanese. You know, this idea of having the big table with family and friends gathered around, and just kind of, you know, having an open home and feeding everyone. I'm often called the Lebanese granny by my friends because I want to feed. But in my soul, I'm African. You know, the rhythm and the soul of Africa beats in everyone who's born on that continent. It's a beautiful place to grow up. And I think when I've been able to resolve that identity, I think there's a realization as well that, you know, everyone is unique and everyone is complex, and no one is, you know, just a single one-dimensional, you know, stereotype. Everyone has got a background, whether it be, you know, a professional background, a cultural background, and just the journey they've been on through life. And when you allow people to be their authentic selves, and I know it sounds a little bit like, you know, textbook, but it's so real and so fundamental. When you allow people to be their authentic selves, the fear that might be holding back the really brilliant idea starts to dissipate. Because everyone, including myself, you know, when you're in an organization, when you're in a group of people, you want to put your best foot forward. You know, I recently was engaged in a conversation where I was really trying to impress the person I was talking to, and I realized after the fact that I was trying too hard. It just ended up being a little bit awkward for me, actually, not for them. And it's true that when you just drop your pretense, when you just drop your that fear, that cloak, that mask, there can be something authentic. Now, whether that person's, you know, from China or India or the US or Brazil or Germany, that humanity shines through. Their experience starts to shine through, and that diversity of thinking, because somebody's experience in Sao Paulo is quite different to somebody's experience in Delhi, but they're going to look at the same problem from literally opposite sides of the world. And it's amazing when you bring those people together in a team, because there's the commonality that starts to really bind them as a team, if you allow that. But there's also the difference, which allows the sort of creative tension or the strategic tension that's necessary to get brilliance. You need a tension, and you need that tension to be resolved through discourse, through sometimes having a hard debate. But if you create that safe space where people can be authentic and can have the hard conversation, and then get to an answer that's now an answer that's better than the one that we had before, people start to feel like we're moving in the right direction. And I think getting there requires three things. The first one, and I've spoken at length about it now, which is giving people the chance to be authentic. Sometimes, I'll be so vulnerable in a meeting. I'll talk about my personal life in a check-in, deliberately, so that people can feel comfortable with this notion of being authentic, and that they don't have to keep something outside at the front door. They can bring their full selves to work. So that part's important. The second part is actually having some structure to how you get a diverse team to connect, because it doesn't always happen naturally, especially if you're online. So actually having moments in the year, either workshops or team building. I work with an amazing executive coach out of Switzerland. I was introduced to her through Pernod Ricard. Her name is Celine Brouillet. Now, Celine has worked with multiple teams with me over the years. And a big theme there is to move from victim to player mindset. So my situation at work is not, the challenges that I face is not because of the other person in operations or in finance or in China or in India. Actually, I need to move into the player mindset, where if I reach out to them and I look for a solution, we start playing together. And that's an important mindset shift for any team. So when you bring a group of people together and you say, we're going to be the leadership team, we're going to be driving leadership in our organization, you typically bring people that are quite diverse. I had a very strong commercial guy, a very strong creative guy, a very strong operations lady, and you allow them to have that tension, but you work through a process to find what is our common objective as a team, what is our common goal, what is our vision, and we as a leadership team then bring that into the organization. That's very useful. Then I'd say the third element is actually having the right processes. And it's something I learned actually at SAB Miller, which is this idea of the discipline of process really unlocks the freedom of creativity. So, that's basically, we have our monthly leadership team meetings. We have our steercos to make the necessary decisions that need to be made. We have our budget reviews. Those are in place, and we then use that time and that space to either discuss leadership, people, talent in the leadership meetings. We discuss projects, budgets, timelines, the cross-functional work, and we actually create the right space for the right conversation so that we don't muddy the waters. And I think it's a combination of authentic leadership, coaching, coalescing of a team, and then the discipline of process that really helps you to bring a global organization to focus on the future.
Yeah. And on the topic of authentic leadership, I think, as you said, part of it is also the leader, him or herself, being vulnerable themselves. And I think one of the things we've really learned, and I think feedback we've gotten, is when leaders share their own misgivings or failures, that really allows everybody to sort of be more authentic or be vulnerable themselves in the situation at hand, right? So that's why I was also curious to understand a little bit about the failures that really shaped you, do you feel, in your own career?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's too many to mention. The truth is, failure is part of success, and it's funny though, because, I keep saying that to my team, organizations keep saying that to the innovators and the R&D team, is like, you got to fail to succeed. And I've even got a poster for my child, that's got the iceberg, with success on the top and underneath disappointment, hard work, failure. So it's so ingrained in I would say the top of the mind, but when you get down to the sort of emotion of it, it's horrible. No one likes to fail. No, there's the ego component of it. There's the sense of disappointing yourself and your team. but it happens. It happens. It happens if you're willing to take risks, and it happens if you're willing to push the boundaries, of your own career, of the work that you're doing, and it's fundamentally important. So let me share a few. I mean, so one of the things I did in my career was when I moved from logistics and distribution at that point into a commercial role at SAB Miller. The next role was, the sort of pure marketing. It was my first brand marketing role. I was the marketing manager for Amstel Lager. And, it was a brand that I had momentum, it was doing really well. And the parent company, because we were the SAB Miller was the distributor and the brand manager for Amstel in South Africa, but it was ultimately owned by Heineken, and they came into the country and they wanted their brand back, which is part of the exit clause with most manufacturers have. So the brand was going to go back to Heineken, and I was then, pivoted into a role where I had to manage that exit and manage the replacement strategy for Amstel. So, which brands would take over the shelf, which innovation work would take over the consumer spaces. And then I was coming out of that, I was then gifted this opportunity to be group innovation manager. And I was super excited about it. It was 2007. I say that importantly because what happened in 2008. 2007, I was given a big budget, and we were going to go and open up new categories. We were going to go after new consumer occasions, and to a large extent, we were making some progress. But innovation in the beer category, looking to break into new spaces, 2008 arrived, and all of that ended. I mean, suddenly, the world shifted. There just wasn't the same sort of money and resource, and there was a return back to the core of the business. And essentially, I feel that I didn't have enough weight or enough early success to defend the budget on innovation. And it was essentially cut from, let's call it 100 to 5. So, that for me was a massive blow. I felt like there was a team that now had to be disbanded. We hadn't made sufficient progress quick enough. And I understand the context of the organization. I understood the decision. And, and SAB Miller were kind enough to give me a really amazing role, taking care of one of their power brands, immediately after that. But it certainly was one of my successes that shaped me. And I think, one of the failures that shaped me rather, and I'd say why it shaped me so fundamentally was, check your ambition, make sure that ambition is not, I wouldn't say, you should stretch, but, have some realism attached to it, like make reality your friend. Be clear in kind of managing the expectations of the organization so that they're not, you're not over-promising and then under-delivering. And then read the signs in the marketplace, read the change in the wind. And too often, and certainly in that situation, I wasn't reading the signs. I was just so hell-bent on delivering my mission, which was to, launch new products and new categories. So, massive lesson for me.
Yeah. How much of because I said it was, I can imagine how impactful that was. I mean, also given the kind of the global context at hand, I suppose, it's sort of, I suppose, somewhat easier to digest. But how much do you kind of go or look back on those situations to sort of help you motivate yourself or your team to do better day by day? So are you somebody that I suppose looks back a lot on those failures to help motivate you today? Or you're somebody that you took the lessons from it and then you just turn the page and move quickly as possible? So how do you use those failures to best motivate you?
Yeah. Look, I would love to say I'm somebody, who takes the failure, turns the page and moves forward quickly, because I admire those people, and it's a lot, you can sleep a lot better, to be honest.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm somebody that revisits them, quite often. And particularly when I'm faced with a new challenge, I go back to the successes, and I try and motivate myself, kind of, we've done it before, I can do it, let's go team. There's only one way, and it's up. But of course, I go back to the moments where it didn't work out, and I try and reflect. I try and use it positively, but it sometimes has a bit of a different impact. It can make you a little bit anxious. So I try to move through the anxiety quickly, because I know it's going to come at some point. And I try and reframe it around, okay, so you've learned your lesson there, don't make that mistake again. Don't let that be your blind spot in this situation. There might be other blind spots, of course, but the worst thing that can happen is that you have the same blind spot reappearing. And that's also happens sometimes to leaders. The same blind spot keeps popping up. And I think what's useful there is to have an external voice, either a great mentor or a coach, or sometimes you have your own line manager who's pretty savvy and willing to share with you some feedback. But using those past experiences, relying on those lessons and learning from them, but also getting an external point of view, I think is really useful. And then I would encourage anyone to kind of then close that chapter and move on. So that's something I'm working on.
Yeah. And when you also look to the future, you also talked a little bit about your son and a little bit about the motivation you give him, or at least the lessons you're trying to impart in him by that iceberg of failure. And I think any parent, certainly myself with a young son as well, trying to wrestle with how do you prepare them for the world ahead, given the speed of change, given the complexity in the world. And you're somebody that said this, well, in spite or as a result of these failures, you've had a great career in terms of work for great brands, top tier management consultant, CMO of a globally recognized brand. So, in the context of today's world, what is also the advice do you give to aspiring leaders, whether that's in a marketing field, wanting to achieve the top job in marketing for a global brand, or just leaders in general? Again, given the vantage point you've had, what's the advice that you give to people coming into the industry or wanting to achieve a similar level of success?
I appreciate the question, Sam. I mean, I think there's a lot of things, if you want to share with people coming into the industry or people that are aspiring to grow. But I think some fundamentals, the first one is I think, well, I truly believe that success in any industry comes from a combination of rigor and empathy. And what I mean by that is, the rigor is, do the work, understand the data, get under the hood of whatever it is that you're doing. There's a rigorous requirement to whatever we do. There's always going to be hard work. And the empathy part is really important, because I think people sometimes forget this when they're obsessing on the rigor. The empathy part is really try to understand what the market, and when we say the market, it's always sort of a very big term, but what human beings are going through right now. Mm-hmm. What are the people that are buying what you're selling going through? At the moment, high inflation, there's the, costs are going through the roof. Like, what are they feeling when they come into the supermarket or into, an online or wherever it is that they might be buying? What are they feeling? What are they calculating in their mind? Like, truly have empathy for the people that you're serving ultimately, but also have empathy for the people that you're working with. And, that's this notion of authentic leadership. Like, really have empathy for the person that's coming in and maybe didn't say good morning this morning. You don't know what happened on the way to work or what happened last night, or you don't know what's going on. And having empathy allows you to make real connections. And it's this combination of rigor and empathy that I think is super, super important to success. The second point that I'd make, and this was advice given to me by a dear agency friend, Jason Xenopoulos, is now the Chief Creative Officer for VML in North America, also a Cape Town guy, and also done really, really well. And he said something to me which I really think is profound. And I've heard it before, but it's just keep reminding myself. In a world that's more and more cluttered with information, opinions, you just open up your mobile phone and you just 1,000 messages are being literally thrown at you. He said something which is rise above the noise. And I think that's just great advice. There's a Rudyard Kipling poem. If you can keep your mind when everyone around you is losing theirs, it goes on to say, then you are a man, my son. Obviously, from a time perspective, then you are an adult, my child, to be more gender neutral. But that if poem and this idea of rise above the noise, I think if you put them together, it's true. There's always going to be some crisis. There's always going to be somebody who wants to start a war and somebody who's rattling the saber. There's always going to be an economic downturn or upturn. There's always going to be some new technology. Now it's AI. last year it was the metaverse, and the year before that was something else. There's always going to be something new that's going to revolutionize or transform. But if you can rise above the noise, try to understand the environment, try to understand the impact on you and on the business, I think it just gives you sort of a bit of a cadence and you can breathe. Otherwise, it's just constantly pedaling and cycling and getting caught up in the next cycle. So those two things, rigor and empathy, rise above the noise. And then finally, I would say, really important for me is to be brave and to be kind, and to have that in balance and in unison. To be brave in the decisions that you take, to be brave with the things that you aspire for, to be brave in telling the truth, but to be kind. You can tell the truth with empathy. You can tell the truth with kindness. You can go for it. You can be ambitious without having to step on the other person's toes. So, because the truth is, a career, like anything, is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So if you're brave and you're kind and you build relationships along the way, they really come and reward you in very meaningful ways. If something goes wrong, and it's bound to go wrong at some point, there's going to be a network of people to rally. If you've been not too kind along the way, you're not going to have that support. Even if you're a multimillionaire, and you're going to need people. We need one another.
Yeah.
So I think those three things would be probably the things I'd start with.
Yeah. People remember how you treat them, and eventually it comes around. So 100% agree, and I think resonates with me. And I wanted to end on one final question, which is always just looking back now, the leadership career you've had. But if you had this opportunity, knowing what you know now as a leader, to go back on the first day that Charl Bassil walks into that production site in P&G, about to take on his first day in leadership, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to him?
It's actually quite an emotional question, funny enough, because I remember myself at the time. And I'll give you the context, actually. My dad was very ill, and it wasn't long after that he passed away. And sort of going into that environment and my first day, I was very excited, very energized. I wanted to take on the world. I wanted to make it better. I wanted to get there faster. But I was also quite anxious. I was worried about kind of the context that I was in, and was it going to work out, and what would happen if it didn't work out. I think the one bit of advice that I'd love to give myself then is to say, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's going to work out the way that it's meant to work out. Give your best. Don't give up. Just keep going. Do the hard work and have the rigor. Keep your empathy, but it's going to be okay. Take away some of the worry and the anxiety, because it's not really going to help in the end. That's what I would say, because I think, if I reflect on that, it's always the case. You're very anxious about, certainly I was, about, doing the right thing, making sure that I progressed. And in the end, it all works out.
Well, look, Charl, I'm sure he would have been tremendously proud if he obviously saw the career you've had. And I think also the lessons that you've imparted hugely resonate with me, and I'm sure with a lot of people. So I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your insights, and thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, that's really great speaking to you, Sam. I must say it's a bit self-indulgent talking about oneself, but it was fun. Thanks.